For 36,000 years, humanity lived in complete harmony with dimensional beings. We lived in complete harmony because we understood and lived as these laws. And after the reset, we lost that knowledge in a way, but it was coded and hidden. And now we're seeing and experiencing a resurgence of that wisdom. We are remembering our divinity. It's like accessing pure source code of reality.
All spiritual teachers in some way are pulling wisdom either consciously or unconsciously from the hermetic system.
If you knock the first domino down, the 100 dominoes downstream goes. The way I would describe it is hermetics allows you to push the first domino. And it's really about an alignment, a merging of the one, the ego, with the infinite, the subconscious.
This is so deep. There's so much here. There's a map, there's a compass. You can trust this. It's in my bones. How can I choose to truly harness this law of cause and effect so that I can, from my heart and soul, be at cause in my life and not only at the effect?
You know, in recent personal development space, I guess they would use the language of radical responsibility. And what they're really just speaking of is the law of cause and effect with a little bit of influence of law of correspondence, which means every moment of our life, this is the paradox. I've spoken about how God has divinely orchestrated every moment of our lives.
Yeah.
But so have us, right? That's the duality. It's like the infinite has orchestrated everything as well as the one. And so the law of cause and effect speaks to taking responsibility that I, no matter what's happening outside of me, it is literally just a reflection of what I subconsciously am programming out into existence and taking that responsibility.
And so when I take the responsibility, I think I love words. I love etymology because baked into a lot of words is at times subversive meaning, which I'd love to go into it with you.
Sure.
But also a very empowering thing that words can be. I think words are prayer. When you say responsibility, what is your understanding of true responsibility as it relates to cause and effect?
My context of it is we are a God self. And that every aspect, like every emotion that we have, every subconscious program, which is not thoughts, they're images and more nebulous knowings, as well as our thoughts, our egoic mind, all of that is working together to craft the entire universe. Forget what's happening in your life. You're literally influencing every molecule in the universe from your own consciousness, you know? And I think, yeah, the responsibility, words are very limiting. You know, we might have talked about how there was a time in human history where we communicated through telepathy, because that comes with feelings and vibrations and not just intellect that we have to unpack and then decode and interpret into our own narrative. And so if I were to speak without the word responsibility, I would say to vibrate the living knowing that you are an aspect of God co-creating all of reality moment to moment.
No pressure on that. I find that fun, but I find that if I'm choosing not to be in the training of my own consciousness, then I can fall into the trap, essentially, of having to overachieve in order to glorify God or in order to live this incredible responsibility that I feel like I have. You know, we did a prayer before we turned on the microphones.
Yeah.
And the summarization of the prayer was essentially, thank you, God, for just letting us be here and having the space to do this. And how can I and we not fall into the trap of the egoic mind when it comes to the responsibility that we've chosen, that our soul has chosen? How does that work? The egoic mind attachment to achievement and having it to be the best podcast ever, or just being in the flow of doing exactly what it is we are doing?
Yeah, we can sort of unpack this from two different contexts. Let's use the drop in the ocean context, right? Essentially what you're saying is, as the drop, how do we not try to accumulate more drops to prove to the ocean that we matter?
To prove, yes.
Right.
That word, yeah.
And that completely dissolves when the drop also remembers it is the entire ocean, right? So when you hold both knowings at the same time, so they counter each other. Right? I'll give a different context in terms of energy, right? A little bit of energy law of polarity. So if this is the ego or one in I, and this is the zero or infinite God, when you embrace the full wave, everything harmonizes. we're not meant to live like this, and we're not meant to live like this either, right? And so if you embrace the ego and the one, and you embrace the infinite and God, the waves would actually just cancel out and nullify, and you would operate from, what my friend Sky, which I highly recommend getting him on the show, calls 0 point, right? It's like accessing pure source code of reality.
Would this be the 0 point field of which you speak?
Yeah.
You had said something to me a few days ago. You said the big contextual difference between the ego, wants to be purposeful and on path, and God does everything with purpose. Can you unpack that?
Sure. To lead people to understanding, what I'm about to say, I'll share a story. I sat in front of this guru who is considered like a living saint in Hindu, religion, philosophy. And he said something that was really impactful for me. He said, gods envy humans because gods don't have free will or choice. Right? A human can say, do I want a hot dog or a hamburger? Hot dog. When God says hot dog happens. God says hamburger happens. So they actually don't have choice. It's fascinating. It was such a huge aha for me, epiphany. And what I'm getting at is, if that is the case, and we recognize that there is this God or infinite intelligence that's orchestrating everything, that means every action that's unfolding in the entire universe and all of reality is an intention of God, which means there was a purpose. Right? And so we literally live, and this is the paradox, right? This is the cosmic joke / the illusion. We literally exist in this beyond comprehension of purpose, because everything's purposeful, because everything's orchestrated by God. But because we don't recognize that, we then isolate ourselves and say, oh, I need to find my purpose. And so I think if we start to realize that we are an aspect of this grand design, grand energy, God, source, spirit, whatever you want to call it, it tends to dissolve that need in that, really illusion of what is my purpose.
Could I replace need with desire and have it be a more integral, for lack of a better term, soulful purpose? In other words, if I don't need to prove myself, yet I'm choosing to have this beautiful desire to share our podcast with millions of people on the world just for the sake of the love that I want to bring, is that a more expanded viewpoint? And would you put it in a different way?
Absolutely. I've spoken a lot about when we produce or create, we want to make sure we check, am I producing from lack? Or am I producing from, there's a hole I need to fill, which is a lack? Or am I producing from wholeness? Because you can make the greatest thing. You can build, I actually just made a video about this. You can build, let's say, orphanages around the world to help children, right? Which seems like a very awesome thing.
Yeah.
But the relationship to that act is, I was not taken care of when I was a child, and I want to make sure others, they need it, right? So it's a hole that was in them that this action fills. And then, of course, they fill other people. While outwardly, action-wise, that's great, but the energetics that they're putting out into the world is there's a hole. And actually perpetuate more holes, right? And so this is just a law of vibration and mentalism. In other words, if the root frequency of the action is born from lack, they're going to produce more lack so that they can fulfill more actions. But if it's just from expression, just from sharing, without lack, from wholeness, like, I love kids, and I think kids deserve orphanages. Very different reason. The same building of orphanages will have a very different impact on all of reality.
What I'm getting from you, tell me if I'm on the right path here, is that the awareness, like, for example, John Wineland was on the show once and he said something so profound. He said, if you're conscious, the wound is where you serve from, but the wound doesn't cloud your wisdom, which I found very worthwhile for me. I think about my own path with emotional epigenetics and, the family who's on our table today. I've never done this before, but it felt right to put my entire family on the table as we're speaking today. Because essentially what I believe we're going through, and I'm curious how you feel about this, is we're coming to a point of consciousness where there seems to be a collective reckoning of honoring of our past for the exact painful gifts and beautiful gifts that it gave us. Do you see that playing out in your life as well?
1,000 bazillion %.
How so?
I mean, even just in February of this year, I was at this event co-facilitating. I think there were 12 of us facilitators with 50, 60 attendees, One of them was a Sufi master. It was incredible. And we're doing all these things, and everyone has their own specialty. One person's like connecting to angels, one person's doing subconscious stuff. And some people are doing like extractions of demons. It was really fun, wild event. Yeah. But towards the end, he said, all this doesn't matter unless we honor, and he specifically said, actually honor our mothers. Mm. And so I've seen so many, and I think because that went into my consciousness, it's a cognitive bias. I'm going to start to notice more of that theme. Literally since February, so many things has been about just honoring what has happened. And if you think about it from an honoring perspective, and I've made videos about this, which is the current context says that our heightened emotional experiences are wounds. But what if they're not wounds? Right? We don't question calling them wounds. They're really heightened emotional experiences where I felt tremendous guilt, shame, fear, and all those things. But what if, the analogy that came to me visually was, it's like God giving you this like 50-pound box, right? And you're like, oh my God, this is heavy. And God's like, when you're 5, look, you're going to have to carry this. And at some point in the future, you're going to get to open this box. But for now, just carry it. And you're like, oh my God, this sucks. I got to carry this weight the whole time. But one day when you open it, you go, oh my God, this is greatest magical gift that turns you into an ultra wizard. I'm just making stuff up. It's no longer a wound. It's really just a gift that you didn't see. It was heavy to carry. And so that's just like a visual metaphor of energetics. We were given these dense energies, and those dense energies are meant to then expand in the moment in time that God intended to at some point for all of reality. That's a very different context than wounds and healing.
For what purpose does God give us this dense box of gift?
Yeah.
For what purpose?
Yeah. God, in infinite self, would want to experience everything in itself in infinite variations, right? Which means, what's an infinite variation? It means every octave of every frequency. Right? And so it would give you a dense, like hold on to the C note at this very dense octave, heavy octave. At some point, it's going to go into a higher octave so that it can experience multiple octaves of that frequency from your perspective. And you can give someone the same exact gift and they open it and they're going to have a different interpretation of that same heavy box in different octaves. And now God gets to experience that version. And so God would want to do this with infinite life forms, to experience infinite versions of these different waveforms and energy. That's my opinion.
Somebody who watched our first episode would grok what you're saying. Someone who maybe is just watching us now, maybe a bit confused by that. I'm just feeling into their energy.
Sure.
Can you provide clarity on why God would need to experience God's self in unlimited ways? Or is why the wrong question?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. I think we are made in the image of God, right? And so to think that God is this separate thing to try to figure out is already a context that separates us from God. And so once we realize, okay, so if we are made in the image of God, or we are in an aspect of God, right? We're a drop in the ocean is God and the drop is Stephen. I do, as the drop, get to also realize, well, I'm technically part of the ocean as well. What does that mean? It means, if you notice, humans, whether we get jobs or careers or accomplish things, there's a fundamental baseline approach to life, which is awareness. Who am I? What am I? What's he doing? What's she doing? It's awareness. And we are doing what God would be doing, which is awareness of life, of existence, of the self. God's just doing it at an infinite level. We're doing it at one level. It's the same. God is learning about itself. God is like, who am I? What am I here for? Just like a human. It's just at a much larger scale.
I've had many ceremonies where I remember clearly like banging my fist and being like, why, God, do you need to know yourself? And why is there suffering? And why does a school bus of children fall off a cliff? And why is there child trafficking? And why? You know what I got back? I got back this playful answer. It was almost like a feminine answer, but it actually had no gender. And it just said to me, you don't get to know. but not like a F you, but like a playful, like, my son, you don't get to know. You don't get to know. Have you ever had moments similar to that in your journey?
For sure. Yeah. And I would unpack, yes. And I unpack those as stop relying so much on knowing and intellect. There are other ways to be experiencing this, which is what I want you to do. So
you said something really profound recently on social media in regards to the law of polarity.
Okay.
You called it the grand cosmic joke, which I love. And we'll make sure we link it right here. You said many of your life's problems are actually coming from the intentions on the other side. Let's go deep into that. Please take your time unraveling this. This is very big.
Sure.
I have a firearm and I carry it with me.
Yeah.
And I've heard schools of thought that say, well, by having the firearm, you're attracting danger. And in my mind, I'm just doing the very best I can to be a father who protects his children. So can you explain what you mean by many of your life's problems are actually coming from the intentions on the other side?
Yeah. There's another law that kind of governs this context of the law of polarity, which is the law of mentalism, which is having a gun is the action, right? That's a gun on you. Your relationship to why the gun is on you will dictate, of course, reality, right? Because you can have a gun on you, I'll exaggerate, because it looks sexy. You want to look sexy. I'm just making stuff up.
That's not my come from. Yeah.
Or you have the gun on you because you're like, that actually helps me feel powerful. Or you can have a gun on you for protection. And every one of those reasons will actually create a very different reality in your life. Same gun, right? And so I just want to make sure we call that out first. So now within the current context that you have of protecting your children, for sure. I've had this discussion with, I've used to treat patients for 20 years. When I meet parents, right? I think almost every parent that I remember wants to protect your children. And I remind them that when the child is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they kind of need protection, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't have
They'll fall off the balcony.
Right. They need protection. But I don't know, 7, 8, 9, 10, do they need protection? They definitely don't need protection when they're 30, 40, 50. But I've treated patients in their 60s and 70s that are still trying to protect their 40, 50-year-olds. And they end up having horrendous relationships, right? Because one, they don't realize they're putting their kids in. You have to put a thing that you want to protect in energetic danger for you to protect them. That is the other side of that spell. And especially when it comes to parents, specific subcontext of parent-child, that child doesn't want to be protected at some point because he goes, I can protect myself, right? And so there's a friction of energies there. And so, yeah, that is a huge, it's one of the most applicable use awareness of the law of polarity is the opposite of the intention that you have that is being manifested. And there's another more subtle one that's hidden, which is when people, for example, if I want to feel hot, I don't know, maybe I'm cool right now. I want to feel hot. Sometimes God, instead of giving you hot, will give you extreme cold. Because ultimately, it's not about getting warm. Ultimately, it's about experiencing the full energetic wave of extreme hot and extreme cold, right? The full energetic wave, the full experience, what I call the totality of reality. And so what I see when I take a step back in people's lives is they ask for here, like 8 units to the right, let's say that's hot, but they're getting 8 units to the left of cold, which is really the same, but they don't recognize it. And they're like, I'm not getting what I want. Because they don't recognize the cold is on the same polarity as the hot. And they think it's something different. They don't acknowledge that as, oh yeah, God actually is giving me something.
How does the pendulum play into this? Because I would assume from my limited understanding that extreme cold would kind of burn, so it would be hot. But isn't it also a pendulum theory that you've spoken about before, where whether it's law of polarity or something else in your hermetic understanding, why would extreme cold be the same as the other side?
Yeah. There's a movie, it was an original old version of Punisher where the character, the Punisher, is trying to get a truth out of this villain, right? So he hangs him upside down and he lights like a blowtorch and he's behind him so the villain doesn't see him. He lights a blowtorch. He's like, you got to tell me the answer. I'm going to like blowtorch you. And then the guy wasn't telling the answer. So he on the other hand, he had an icicle pop, like an ice pop, and he stuck it on his back. And the guy, because he heard the blowtorch, just thought he was getting burned and he starts screaming out the answer. And so it's alluding to what you just said, extreme cold can feel and is exactly the same as extreme hot, right? Because it's just a mirror on the other side. And so, and literally for example, if someone's slightly lonely, they're like, I want connection. When people ask for connection, how many people do we know that ask for connection that actually ends up having, I don't know, the spiritual term would be a dark night of the soul where everything falls apart and they're actually even more lonely? Yeah. That's a great example of they ask for connection and God's like, oh, you want to feel what connection feels like? I'll just have you feel extreme loneliness. And now when you feel extreme loneliness, where you were was already connection. It gives you the wisdom.
So by experiencing the opposite of what one is vocally desiring or holding on to, in other words, they're holding on to this desire with white fist.
Yes.
The intention of God is to bring the opposite for the wisdom to come through.
The intention of God is to have you experience the full polarity, the full swing, so that you get off of it. But if you're constantly only saying, I want to go forward on the swing, God keeps pushing you back. But like, no, you get to swing the full swing. You're constantly stuck on the swing. God just wants you to get off the swing. It's like, in the hermetic stories talk about like, we're like a child at a playground, 100 different swings. I mean, there's technically infinite. We pretend that's 100. And they're all different stories and identities. And we're meant to swing, strong, weak, brave, fearful. My mom sucks. My mom is amazing. Right. And so, and once we do the full swing, we go, oh, I get what the full polarity and perception of these opposite sides are like. Then you get off the swing because it's boring. But if you get on the swing, you go strong, strong, strong. You never allow yourself to feel weak because you've been told that's bad. You're stuck on it.
Yes.
And so just God wants you to get off the swing, because when you get off the swing, all the swings, you no longer have any stories, any identities, and you become nothing, and the opposite of nothing is everything, which is God. You return.
So good. Since we connected last, what has been one of these divine teachings or something that you've been able to embody by experiencing the opposite of what you were holding on to so tightly? Has something like that happened for you since we've spoken last?
Yeah. So I was just on a month-long travel expedition. It started with 2.5 weeks in Tibet. And it was another mission, which is really interesting because I was in Tibet last year at almost exactly the same dates, just 2 days off, unplanned. And so I invited a previous partner of mine to come. And I didn't invite her to come to be like, let's definitely get back together. I invited her to come this time, not from a desire of being together, but from pure exploration of let's see what happens, non-attached. Right? Not wanting partnership, which could be, God be like, okay, if you want partnership, I'm going to give you the opposite of partnership, which is, I don't know, friction and fighting.
And there wasn't even a shred of desire in you.
There was. I did let her know that I would love to.
Yes,
but
yes.
I'm not going to force it. It is not an intent. I'm not going to be moment to moment trying to get you to be my partner.
Yeah.
And so, because I realized, a few months ago, I was like, in the last 1.5 years, every area of my life has been beyond miraculous and magical except partnerships. And I was like, why? And I was like, duh. Every area of my life, I let go of all desires, except in partnerships, I was like, I want a partner. It was so obvious, but I didn't catch it. So once I let it go, she went on the mission with me. And what's really interesting is we are entering back into a partnership, but it was not without tremendous friction. And I'll share, I'm open book. About 1.5 weeks into this mission, we were definitely coming closer and closer, right? It was incredible. And I was divinely guided. It was like 2 a.m. I was divinely guided to get on her phone. And 2 a.m., she's asleep. I was asleep. I woke up. Her phone is actually unlocked and open, which is quite strange. So I get on her phone. I was guided to look at some of her messages. And I saw that even while she was in Tibet with me, she was messaging other men and being very flirtatious and sexual in the texts. And I did not sleep that night because my electrical system was I was having a very heightened emotional experience, right? Of like just distrust, betrayal, anger, all of it came up. And it took us about the next 2 weeks to process all of that. Right. And so I was given this full pendulum swing of, oh yeah, partnership, sure, you'll feel that. Oh, I'm going to totally wreck that and put you in a sense of betrayal and all the victim and all the things that you haven't processed on the other end within this container. That was my last month. Yeah.
What was the fruit of the pendulum? What came through?
Well, she's at my house right now, and we're working on it. So, yeah.
That's so good.
Yeah.
The divine orchestration, that's the phrase that's come through with you a lot, this orchestration.
Yeah.
I feel like my sense of love has been so convoluted and distorted. And a lot of it has come from, I've shared with my audience very openly about the pornography issues in my life and my journey with breathwork and psychedelics and healing to overcome that.
Yeah.
And I say that because I think we're all unpacking and unraveling probably millennia of conditioning. And I'm getting like shooting energy through my chest right now just talking to you about this, because I know, I trust that every single man who may listen to this or absorb this podcast has had some type of dance with, let's just call it distorted sexual energy.
For sure.
I don't need to know why God needs to experience God in this distorted energy, because you've covered that. But there also is malevolent forces in the world that are by their own polarity swing, pushing us back to love. Have you personally, or the people you've worked with, ever dealt with distorted sexual energy? And if so, what is the path to healing and wholeness around sexuality, here in modernity especially?
The short answer of noticing other people constantly.
Especially here in Austin.
Especially
Good
here in
God.
Austin. Especially here in Austin.
Polyamory bullshit.
Yeah.
Get out of here.
Especially here in Austin.
Anyways, go ahead.
That's a whole nother rabbit hole we can go down. And so, yeah, I guess first I'll address the whole, well, if everything is God, then what does that mean?
Yeah.
Just look at the yin yang symbol, right? It's got the white swirl with the black and the dot.
It's on the screen right now. This is a good visual.
Right. Yin and yang. We can say there's light and dark. There's white and black. And there is. But what's also true is it's the yin and yang symbol, which means it's one. So the entire symbol is God, but within God, there has to be, because it needs contrast to experience itself, a light and a dark. And then the fact that the dot in the black part has a white dot and the white part has a black dot is hinting at it's still just one, right? Even though visually it looks like two separate things. I just want to give that context so what I'm about to say makes a little bit more sense. And so what we would call malevolent forces, which probably because of condition, we would call that the black part.
Or we may call it demonic.
Right.
Things like that.
Right. Evil, demonic, dark, dense, so many terms for it. Yes, that exists, but technically it is still part of the yin yang symbol. So which means it's part of God. God has to create a dense experience of itself so that it has contrast to experience the light of itself. Right. And so the reason I'm mentioning this is, yes, I have seen the malevolent, demonic, evil, whatever forces do its thing on sexual, and I'll get to why sexual, but I don't judge it. Right. I don't approve of it. Right. It's not what I would want in my life constantly, but there's no judgment of it being bad or wrong or evil, because I'm like, got it. This is just this has to happen for it to experience itself in multiple ways. Right. Once I sort of let go of judgment and I navigate, clearly I don't want distortion, sort of in my field. And so it shows up so subtly. This is a very tricky topic. And first I'll preface it with, I'm definitely not the expert to speak on this. There's tons of people who are experts on this very specific topic of sexual distortion energy. I think the shaman that I work with, Kurakindi down in Ecuador, would be an amazing person. I mean, that was like boot camp training for 10 days to like experience the most subtle aspects of that. It was so subtle. I was there with someone, just friends, but she did have an intention of like wanting something more than friends. And we're sitting in ceremony and they're basically screaming at her and me that we're leaking this sexual energy. Even though I had no intention whatsoever, I'm just sitting there meditating, but it was so subconscious and subtle until they pointed it out. When they first pointed it out, my ego was like, no, that's not there. But the rest of the night, I felt it. Right? It was like undetected until they pointed it out. And I just want to give that story so I don't come across like I know how to detect all the things. But from my perspective, from my experience, I would say, one, I'll say the reason sexual energy is that's creative force. If you can distort creative force, you can distort creation, right? Which is why the other team would want to distort that. And as far as discernment of it, I guess, I'm also a huge fan of like, what's the context that can give the most clarity. And it goes back to, I like to keep it simple. If you're ever coming from lack, I'm like lacking something, and you're doing something, and if that thing is involving in a sexual energy realm, you want to double check your reason. Because that lack is the opposite of whole, and whole would be God. And so if you're in the lack space, which is separation, there's something else that I need, right? An other and self, then typically there might be a little bit of distortion in that reason.
That's very good. How have you worked through, and I'm asking this for myself because I still find myself at times very angry at pornography. I've had moments of clarity though, where I'll actually thank the pornography for being in my life.
Great.
Like, thank you so much for giving me this, kind of pseudo peace that I was craving because of the other meta issues that I was blind to. And when I healed those meta issues, and I'm still in the process of looking at and healing these meta issues, then I am able, for like a temporary reprieve, to actually just be grateful for the pornography being there and for seeing it as a trap door that I can either choose to enter or not. I think the part that's really hard for me to grok, and I'd love your understanding on this, especially as it relates to the hermetic system, the part that makes me exhale is I see the pain that I've gone through with it, and I see the financial interest, and what I can see, even not from judgment, just from observation, as the parasitic forces that actually take advantage of women and sexualize women and really harm men by deconditioning their limbic system, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, Gary Wilson, Your Brain on Porn, is a phenomenal resource for this, for the neurology and the addictive tendencies of men.
Yeah.
Where is the responsibility of the arbiter of this pornography? Where is the societal responsibility that just says things like, oh, it's up to you to heal yourself, but we all have, some of us, not all of us, some of us have addictive proclivities towards pornography. How have you worked through your anger or your resentment or your judgment of malevolent, kind of distorted sexual energy to actually pull back and say, I see it for what it is? How have you personally worked through that?
Yeah. I think there's two layers in which we can sort of unpack or relate to. The first initial layer is the actual thing, pornography, right? And, we can cognitively make up all kinds of stories.
May I say one thing? Yeah. So it's not even pornography. It's just, let's just call it distorted sexual energy, whether it's billboards in New York Square or just the hyper-sexualization of women is just one of many aspects of what pornography is, I think, creating trapdoors for people on. So I just wanted to say that's not just pornography. It's all sexual distorted energy.
Yeah, I love it. Expand the context. And so we can cognitively choose whatever story we want as we see those billboards and see those acts. But I think the layer that's missing and not talked about is how we feel with our original story before we become our conscious selves and say, no, there's a better interpretation. That initial gut reaction, I believe that's the gold, right? If your initial gut reaction is anger, we actually want to honor and love that angry part of ourselves, right? Because what if God is showing you the billboard or the porn or someone that's, sex trafficked, like extreme, for those acts to reveal in you deeper and deeper layers of hidden anger, resentment, fear, whatever it may be, whatever the initial reaction is, so that when that surfaces, you process it. Well, how do you process it? Well, from a hermetic principle, you love it. You love it until you fully love it, and then love returns everything back to one. But in the Western society industrial medical complex, they will name it. Because of that wound, you now have an addiction. They create a whole subset of treatments and stories and diagnoses. And there's a ton of people who then become experts at this paradigm of the diagnosis, the treatment, the neurology, and all that stuff. And they don't realize they're literally playing the game by the other team. The other team would say, there's something wrong with you. You need treatment for that. God would be like, you're loved no matter what. There's nothing wrong. I orchestrated everything. all of this is a game for you to feel all the feels so that you love that part of you because you're loving me as you love yourself. You're returning everything back to love, right? Everything that is deviating from love as you love it comes back to source as love. And that cycle allows God to experience itself. That's a very different game than we have some type of disconnection. And there is some crossover of the other team's teaching that is going into sort of God's way, which is we now know that most addictions, if not all addictions, is because the person does not feel good about themselves. So the act, it could be food, it could be porn, whatever, is designed just to distract the self from feeling the self. Well, what makes a person not feel good? The root thing is they believe they're disconnected from others, right? So it goes back to if you simply remember that you are the ocean and you are interconnected with all life, most of our internal pains would go away. There'll be no need for what we would call our addictions. So I want to touch upon the root thing to make sure we call that out.
I felt waves of emotion when you were describing that. So I know that there's something palpable for all of us to go into. You had said to me via text message, I just messaged you and I said, what's really top of heart for you? And you said the New Age spirituality deception of identification with star seeds, Atlantean, Lemurian, et cetera. These contexts are designed to further box us. Can you connect that to what you just shared and then also expand that concept? I think the New Age spirituality deception is alive and well, probably now more than ever.
More than ever. Yeah. So we'll keep it simple, right?
Is it really that simple?
I like to simplify things. The simplified thing is God, source, universe, infinite, would want us to remember it is God, source, universe, infinite. It is one, right? Interconnected, one thing. So any context that puts us in a box separates us from the infinite. And these identities have been going on forever, right? Rich, poor, Democrat, Republican, caste system, right? Certain caste systems in certain, there's so many ways to segment people. Of course, now in the spirituality space, it's like, I'm Lyrian, you're Palladian, you're Atlantean, you're Lemurian. It's just, it's the same game, just applied to different terminology to keep your egoic self to say, look how special I am. I'm Palladian. That means I'm really good at, healing others and so on and so forth. No, you've been everything. You are everything. And so while it's fun I'm not saying that these things are wrong. It is fun to step into that separation, go, ha ha, great. But remember, you are, of course, everything. You've been every plant, you've been to every molecule in the entire universe. So, because we literally are a collection of stardust from the universe, from an atom perspective.
So the deception is actually part of the game for awareness. For awareness. How would one subtly train their intuition to recognize deception? To play the game better, not to be in a box of their own.
That's a great question. I would say, again, first I'll contextualize, deception doesn't mean wrong or bad either, right? Really, deception is tricking us from forgetting that we are God, whole, interconnected in the universe. So let's just define that. So any context, program, actions that separates, you just recognize, got it. This thing, we don't have to even name it as deception. This thing is having me experience separation. And you just got to be aware of the fact that you're experiencing separation with no judgment. Then you go, okay, I felt like what it was like to feel separate and lonely and all the things. Let me just go back to oneness and source and God without any judgment, right? It's that this is true freedom to me, right? True freedom is knowing that you can choose which context, which state, which emotion, which anything internally that you want.
It's interesting because when I hear the word deception, it puts me in hypervigilance. When I even hear the word, somebody's trying to deceive me. I've even said in arguments with my wife, like, are you fucking with me? It was like this old programming from childhood because I was fucked with. I actually was. It was part of the game. And so part of my deconditioning and unraveling to wholeness and love with my wife and with my children has been a recalibration and a calming down of my own hypervigilance in my neural tree. Something I want to say thank you for. I gave a talk, I think it was 2 rooms down for you at the Dave Asprey's conference. And my talk was on emotional epigenetics, which is my understanding of the scientific and spiritual understanding of how we receive trauma, AKA energy in motion, stuck emotion, and how we can do our work to let it go. It's the next 10 years of my life. I'm fully in. That's why my family's on the table.
Yeah.
So I want to thank you for this understanding of the hidden subversiveness and honestly deception in modern grammar. The word nervous system. I took what you told me and I have applied it. I have renamed everything in our curriculum to neural tree and neural system. Because that's essentially what it is. And I checked the scientific coding. It's still the same. But the word nervous, just like when I heard the word deception, it cued something in my conditioning. I would love for you. So first of all, thank you for that. That was amazing. And my students and everybody that I touch is going to be held in a better way, held in such a better way with the fine use of language. Can you unpack the understanding of etymology and language and really the power of words as prayer and how that plays into the spiritual deception that we've been talking about? How do words become deception and the way to know the difference?
Yeah. I have friends that are really into etymology. Like when they hear a word, they can unpack the Latin root of these words.
Kind of fun.
It's super fun.
Yeah.
And I'll preface it with, I am not that person. What I do recognize is this, because to me, that seems kind of complex. There's a lot of brain power that would need to go into remembering the etymology of all the words, right? And just to give everyone context, I did go through 2 years ago this period of my life where my brain just didn't work for 3 months because of flesh-eating bacteria. And so you're just meeting me at a phase of my life where I've learned to not rely on the intellect, but rely more on intuition. And because of that, I have not gone into deep etymology because it's very intellectual. What I will say though is what I found is that any word that becomes mass media popular, question it. Even if they seem like good words. I'll give you an example, vulnerability. Very popular these days. And I always write about and make videos about how I don't believe that when we open up our true feelings and our emotions and thoughts, when we open it up, that does not put us at risk at all. Right? It does not make us vulnerable, but it's termed as you're being vulnerable. You're opening your heart, you're sharing how you're feeling and what you're truly thinking. I believe that emotional and authentic expression allows us actually to simply connect. There's only a risk if you're attached to a certain response you want the other person to have in response to what you just said. If you don't have that attachment, there's no way you can be hurt. Right? If you tell someone you love them for the first time and you're like, hopefully she or he says, I love you back. And they don't, ouch, you were being vulnerable and you got hurt. But if you're not attached to them saying anything, you're just expressing, then you can't be hurt. But right now, when people do share their hearts and their minds, it's being turned vulnerable. It's literally programming that you are now at risk when you open your heart. That's the context. And I don't think that's served. Right. And that's a great example. And we can unpack so many trauma. I mean, any word that's become mass media popular, I start to question.
Well, I think in my world, the ones that I'd love to replace and that I am replacing is nervous system with neural tree. Vulnerability with what? I'd love your take on that. And anything else that you see in the personal growth field or even in the world of spirituality, what are some other terms that we can start to reframe?
Yeah, I personally use emotional openness or authentic expression instead of vulnerability, right?
Emotional,
I'm just in the business world, what's come to me to share is, we've evolved from capitalism to conscious capitalism, which I still believe it's capitalism, which is still an extractive energy that's leading to destruction of humanity and planet. Right, and conscious capitalism sounds good. It sounds like, oh, you're doing the right thing, or the good thing, or the positive thing, all the judgy words. But you're still extracting, and you're just taking extra resources that you've extracted, and you try to do greater good with it. But you're still extracting. And the term that came to me to use is spiritpreneuring, right? To evolve from capitalism to conscious capitalism to spiritpreneuring. Spiritpreneuring means every decision from the inception of the idea of the business to every team meeting to iteration to prototyping to whatever, everyone benefits. You don't only have the benefit post-transaction. That's capitalism, right? If you have a product or service, the prospect does not benefit until they buy. Once they buy and they consume the product or service, then there's a benefit. That's called a transaction. We can't survive as humans this way. We need to be thinking spiritpreneur, which is even the advertising, even if someone doesn't buy, just by reading the ad, they've benefited. Every meeting with your team, it's not about let's build this thing. Every discussion, every meeting, everyone has benefited. And it's not harder to do, it's just different to do. It's just a different context. So it's another example in the business world in terms of languaging.
That's so good. I believe you had told me that you just got back from, I don't know if you can talk about it or not, but a lot of companies will hire you to read the energy of their mission, which is actually an entity of its own, right? The company, like Wellness and Wisdom and Emotional Epigenetics, has its own frequency. It has its own energy that in my heart of hearts, I am doing my very, very best to be authentic about and to really share with people why I'm doing it and what it's for and how it's here for the greater good. A lot of companies don't ever get that clarity. And that actually translates to the leader, him or herself, where they're not exactly sure why they're doing it. And they may be doing it from their very wound itself. Can you talk about what you do for companies and also what you see in certain CEOs, their fuel substrate, if you will?
Yeah. The first thing we can let the listeners and viewers know that, in Western psychological terms, we would call it an egregor, right? When we constantly think of a word, it creates this field of that word.
Egregor.
Yeah. And in the alchemy hermetic world, we would call it a living being in the astral plane, right? So there are 5 planes of existence. There's the physical plane, which is the world of physical matter. There's the etheric plane, which is a mix of energy and matter. Right? People who do Reiki or energy work, they're working in the etheric plane. And then there's astral. Astral is pure energy. And think of astral plane as single conglomerate units of energy. Above astral is the mental plane. The mental plane would be if you took 10, 20, 30, 100 of these different energies and stuck them together like different Lego pieces. We would call it something in the mental plane. And then there's the spirit plane, which is God, oneness, right? And we exist in all 5 planes. And so what we're not taught as humans in modern society is that when you build a business, you're basically focusing your God creation imaginative mind and consciousness on something. And when you do that long enough, you birth it. You birth it as a being in the astral plane or an egregor, right? So it's literally its own living thing. But most entrepreneurs don't know this. And most entrepreneurs, once they hear this, they go, okay, so the living thing is based on our mission, right? Our mission is to plant 1,000 trees or do greater good for the environment. No, that's not what's went into programming. That is your thinking egoic mind of what you want the business to do. What went into the energetics of this being in the astral plane, which goes back to how did you feel and what was the reason of why you created the business? This is huge. Right, I'll give you an example. I worked with a very large organization, and it was founded on activism, which is fight and protect. Right, and while they fought and protected millions of acres of indigenous lands around the world, they recognized that frequency, that way of being, that vibration no longer serves now. Right, it's just leading to what a path of humanity that we currently don't want. And they know that the new way or new frequency is love, oneness. And so we spent a few days recoding the energetics, getting the founders, the core team together, and getting all of their internal subconscious deep frequencies to recode, right, to override, to literally like change the code of the organization. And then what they saw was that the following month, they raised more money that month than any previous year combined. Right. And the reason I'd like to share that example is the future wants to and is going to happen. And when I say the future, that varies, right? Depends upon who's listening and what their context of the future. But the future wants to happen. So any listener or viewer that wants this utopic, awesome, thriving future, it wants to happen. It just needs you to live as that now. We are programmed, we need to do A to get to B. We're not programmed, you just live as B and B happens. And so anytime that we have a business or a family or whatever, you're like, oh, there's some problems and all the things, you just go, okay, what is the future frequency way of showing up and living? How do I live as that now? Right. And so that's, I've worked with a lot of businesses. There's one business, since they don't want me to say the name, they now prior to their weekly team meetings, they actually connect with the astral being of their business and ask what it wants. And it has a voice, equal voice, just like a team member. That is awesome.
I'm guessing that's not on Wall Street.
Not on Wall Street. No.
That would change the whole system if Wall Street did that.
Yeah.
Wow, so profound. Oh my gosh, there's some codes in there. It's on the screen right now, joshtrent.com/hermetics.
Yeah.
This course has changed my life.
Yeah.
I literally go through it. I went through it this morning. We've had hundreds and hundreds of people from our audience absorb this wisdom. It actually tactically, tangibly, viscerally will change someone's life if they engage with your work. I wholeheartedly mean that. It's been just a profound experience to get through the simplification of the hermetic system, because everything that people need is there. I mean, I think you said you built it in one night.
Yeah.
And you just set up a camera with no notes and it just downloaded. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. About 2 years ago at 11 p.m., at the time, the apartment I had, I'd set up like a permanent green screen with a camera because I was making a lot of content. Literally getting ready to go to bed. The instructions, which I've had since I was 5 and I've committed to listen to it, it said, go and make this course. So it's like, okay, so I got on a shirt that you'll see that I wear in all the videos, I'm sure. And for 4.5 hours straight, I talked out the course, one take. And I just sent that into a video guide that put it into the things and it was done. So it was in a way like channeled or intuitively, instinctively came through me. It wasn't like, okay, how do I structure the course? What's going to help people learn it the best? Like none of that. It was just came out.
You had shared with me the hermetics help you navigate life like a compass. I think this is really beautiful because whether it's the law of mentalism or not, or just conditioning, we all want a map. You know, we use the iPhone, it's got a map on it, right? And when I'm going somewhere super far, I like having a map. But having a map is just the starting place. So the understanding of these 5 realms, the physical, etheric, astral, mental, spiritual, how does the course actually take somebody from just having a map to true embodiment, which is really what we're all seeking. We're all seeking this embodiment. How do we be B without having to go from A to B?
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah. Essentially, imagine if you were to navigate being in different locations, you would want a map and a compass, right? Once you have a map and a compass, you can be pretty confident you can go to anywhere you want.
Yeah.
If you don't have a map and you just have a compass, it doesn't feel good because you're like, I know which direction I'm going, but I have no idea what's ahead of me, like what's going on. Or if you just have a map without a compass, you're like, I'm going to get lost. Like I don't know which direction I'm going. So you need a map and a compass. And so the compass is like the hermetic principles. They help you navigate how to navigate life, basically. And then the map is the 5 realms, right? The physical, etheric, astral, mental, and spirit. And I don't have a course on that because I haven't embodied those enough in myself to be able to just like channel it.
That's honest.
Yeah. I'm still learning it myself.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've only taught it twice so far in these activations that I do, which I call the advanced activations. Like once people get the hermetic principles, then they can learn sort of these 5 realms. And it's very different. It's specific rituals, meditative practices, energy practices to affect these realms. Right. So it's much more tactical than just like applying those hermetic principles. It's a very different game. But when you have the map and the compass, you basically feel this sense of peace, certainty, and calmness as you navigate life. And that means a lot because most people are navigating from chaos and lack. And so that deep sense of certainty and calmness just emanates that into the universe as you're experiencing life.
The law of correspondence, you said that it was really the law that resonates deeply for you. You said this in the course.
Yeah.
How so and why does it resonate so deeply with you, this law of correspondence?
Sure. I always say it's my favorite law. As I feel into it, it's probably because, so no judgment, my mom is the epitome of the victim mode. She's like the ultimate mirror victim. And as I reflect on my life when I was young, like I used to fight with my brother and I'd be like, he's being mean, he's a a-hole. It was victim. It was basically blaming others and how they're treating me. And probably the reason why I like the law of correspondence the most is it flips the script, right? So I spent so much of my life on the victim side that now I'm enjoying the other side, which is, oh no, I've created everything, right? And so the law of correspondence really encompasses you've created everything. So that's probably why it's my favorite, because it's the contrast to my childhood. So,
and such a healing power that comes from this. You talked about a movie, actually, Patch Adams, which I saw. It's a great movie. Can you talk about the fingers that the main character held up and how that relates to correspondence?
Yeah. So, in the movie, Robin Williams, who plays Patch Adams, which I got to meet a few years ago, awesome human. And he's in this insane asylum where his sort of mentor, benefactor, right, which has given him land to build a hospital and all the things. And then this guy is in a mental ward, so everyone thinks he's crazy, but he's really not. He holds up 4 fingers to Patch and says, how many fingers do you see? Because Patch is asking him questions for him to get clarity. He's like, how many fingers do you see? He's like, 4. And he's like, no, that's not how many. How many fingers do you really see? And after a while, what the camera did was it zoomed past the fingers, and the fingers, if you held up 4 fingers in front of you and you looked 3 feet beyond your fingers, you would see 8, right? Because your eyes would cross. And so what the guy was getting at is when you look at the actual thing, which is why I would say the thing is never the thing, you'll never get clarity. You got to look past it, beyond it, the meta, right? So when you look beyond it, the thing isn't the thing. And that's what that scene shows.
And it touches on the particle and the wave. One of the movies I've quoted more than Finding Joe, which is one of my favorite documentaries, has been What the Bleep Do We Know, where they did the double slit experiment. It's on the screen right now, the particle and the wave, for y'all to absorb. Can you walk us through how this has impacted your understanding of the hermetics, or maybe vice versa?
Yeah. I definitely came across What the Bleep Do We Know prior to hermetics. And when I learned the hermetics, the story that I made was, the double slit experiment is just, proving in my mind some of the hermetic principles, right? Law of correspondence, law of mentalism, law of vibration, and law of cause and effect. And so, I sort of cite that study, the double slit experiment, all the time, right? Because it literally shows it's the irony of our consciousness is affecting the infinite probability of waves of light into physical matter. And in the study, it doesn't talk about it, but if we were to apply the law of correspondence, it's not just random particle matter. It's particles in an orientation that exactly matches your subconscious, which is the law of correspondence, right? And we're doing this to all of reality. And that's how powerful we are. And yet we try to become in a spirituality space, like, I'm going to step into my power.
Right.
No, you've been beyond powerful your whole life. Right. And so it's just this paradox of we've been programmed to think that we're small in all the things, but in reality, we were made in the image of God. We've been crafting and co-creating reality 24/7 since we were born, always manifesting. We're never not manifesting. That's why I laugh at all the things that talk about let's manifest. Really the language ideally would be, let's align your conscious egoic desires with your subconscious programming. That's really what it is, right? Because if you have things in your life that you don't have that you want to manifest, it's because your subconscious is manifesting those things that you don't have, that you don't want. And it's really about an alignment, a merging of the one, the ego, with the infinite, the subconscious. It goes back to the same game.
On a scientific level, it's fascinating because when something is observed, it changes the relationship between the particle and the wave. So somebody who might be more, I guess you could say, left-brained or analytical, they can really grok this. This is a good one. Can you share about the scientific findings of the particle and the wave when it's observed? This is really important.
Yeah, you literally in real time change the behavior of that wave / particle. Right?
Just by observing it.
Just by observing it. Just your conscious awareness of it, you're literally collapsing in an experiment, right? When no one was observing, the particles or the photons that they shot out were waves. But when measured, it became particles, right? And so that tells us that our consciousness, one way to conceptualize it is our conscious awareness slows down vibrations enough so it changes from waveform to solid, right? We densify it. And it totally makes sense because if you think about it, we're human. We're a densified form of spirit. So of course, our densified form, our eyes and our brain and our consciousness, when it pays attention to something, we would have that effect. We would densify, right? And in that moment, there's a even bigger meta. We are acting like God, creating reality from infinite probability of light into physical matter, just like God is doing it. We're doing it 24/7. That's like the big aha.
It's a pretty big one.
Yeah.
And if people want to go deep in that, we have that in the show notes. I whether it's law of mentalism or not, I was going deep into real or imagination. And there was an article on Quantum Magazine that talked about, how does your brain tell the difference between imagination and reality? And they found that it was the same. What we imagine and what we attach to can be perceived by our neurology as real, which is why it's so important. All the masters from the Tao to Bob Proctor to New Thought to Dr. Stephen Young, y'all are all sharing with us this wisdom with different words, with different packaging, but the crux of the wisdom is so potent. If we can just understand this one thing, what we imagine and what we attach to will actually create our reality.
Yep.
Can you please expand this? Because this is, if y'all get one thing, I mean, you're getting many things from this conversation. If you get one thing, this is probably one of the most important ones.
Yeah, I once did an entire hour talk on imagination, so I can unpack this a bit. Yes, for those viewers that don't know, they've done studies like they had people look at a fireplace and it measured their brain activity. They had them imagine looking at a fireplace and it measured their brain activity. It lit up exactly the same. And I recently read a great study where, I forget the guy's name, but he basically had a group of students and he said, this week, set the mental intention to not climb any ladders. Like, don't climb any ladders. Like, that was the mental egoic thinking mind. But each night, imagine that you climb ladders. And the majority of the students, coincidentally, that week had to climb a ladder. Right? And so it's such a great example of how our imagination actually is more powerful than our conscious desires, which is why school and schooling is designed to crush imagination out of children's minds, because it's designed to enslave humanity to be obedient factory workers, not creative, reality-changing, enlightened beings. And the thing, if there's one thing they can take away, is imagination, because it's one of our most powerful gifts, right? Because if we simply just delete that word and we use something like our conscious imagery creates all of reality, that changes everything. Because that's what's actually happening, especially when we imagine, because we don't imagine sentences, we imagine pictures and scenes, which is our subconscious, right? And so we're literally, as we imagine, we're programming our subconscious, which, as a reminder, can process between 200 million to 400 billion bits per second, whereas our story, meaning-making sentence mind can only process between 8 to 20. So that's the power of our conscious imagery abilities.
And you're, in your own unique wisdom, you're reciting something that we'll have this on the screen for everybody to talk about with us in our group. Go to liberatedlife.com right now. We're talking about this. This was a study from 1910 that was switched on to exactly what you are describing. It was called an experimental study of imagination. In 1910, the study of the psychologist Mary Cheeves, Wes Perky, found that when our perceptions match what we're imagining, we assume that their inputs are imaginary. This is so profound. So whether it's you right now in this moment, or touching back to a lot of the teachings and many, I guess you could say, religious ideologies, they're doing their best. But the part that's, I think, really, it has waves of grief and sadness for me when I really feel into it. The imagination of religion, which is really, if you look at the etymology, I've heard that religion goes back to a Latin word that means division. I don't know if that's true or not, but I could see that potentially being true. There's been this illusionary bifurcated war between science and spirit for so long. Kind of the deception that we've spoken about already. At this table, there is room for all. There is room for science. There is room for spirit. There is room for God. I wish God is right here. God's here, pulled up a chair with us, co-creating this with us. Have you seen this on a grand scale? If you go very meta, 30,000 feet in the sky, this illusionary bifurcation between science and spirituality. To me, it is an ultimate sham. It is a big hoodwink. They are one and the same, but yet so many people grapple with this because of what we went through with the COVID theater. Trust the science, white knuckle, trust the science. Can you give us clarity on this?
Yeah, we can trace back. It was the church that basically divided science and spirit, because prior to the church, the alchemists. Alchemy is the complete harmony and merging of science and spirit, right? In alchemy, they talk about turning lead into gold, and there's many scientists who have tried to actually turn lead into gold and have failed. But there are certain alchemists who documented, 3 of them, that were able to actually turn lead into gold. But in that process, what they realized was that it's not about the physical, measurable experiment you're doing with the materials and the processes that turns lead into gold. You can do exactly the mapped out formula to do that. But if your internal self, if you have not turned your internal lead into gold, right? Everything we talked about, the dense energies into gifts, you're not going to turn the external world of lead into gold. That's law of correspondence, law of mentalism, law of vibration. It's also internal alchemy or spirit and external science material world. They need to merge as one for this to work. So it's coded from lead to gold is essentially coded to say that spirit and science operates as one. And the epitome, the epitome goal of an alchemist is to turn lead into gold. Right? In other words, the epitome goal of an alchemist is to fully embody the merging of science and spirit. And it was a church that came in and wiped that out. I mean, most of the alchemical books that taught all this were burned by Christianity. And then many scientists, for example, Isaac Newton, we know him as a physicist. No, he wrote more books about alchemy than physics, just hidden from history. He actually was the one that decoded the Emerald Tablet into English. Fascinating, right? And so all of them, the Galileo, all the scientists were alchemists. They had to hide it because if they publicly say, hey, we do alchemy, the church would have just killed them. Wow. And this is documented. You can look this up. Yeah, it's the church. And I'm not saying the church is bad. The church had to do this in that time period for us to, right? It's the pendulum. It had to separate and divide science and spirit because right now we're definitely heading towards this, why we're having this discussion. One of the reasons, the merging of the two. And God orchestrated a bigger game. So we don't want to judge that time period as being evil or bad. If we have just perspective and zoom out, it's like, oh, got it. Now we're swinging this way. We were swinging this way, and now we're going to swing this way. Yay.
It's like the religious imagination took many scriptures that I think are inherently really good and really beautiful. There's so much wisdom in, honestly, all religious text, whether it's the Bible or the Tao or anything like that. And it's interesting. I'm wearing the symbol for the Philosopher's Stone.
Yep.
This has always called to me, and I got introduced to this by a tattoo on Teal Swan. And it's part and parcel of our programs. I look at it through a Jungian lens, where Jung was switched on very deeply to the Philosopher's Stone and the alchemy process that you're describing. And he said that the pathway is from this conceptualization of lower self to high. Are you wearing it as well? So here we go. Okay, so synchronicity in full play. Yep. The reason that I wear this, it's a reminder for me to turn my own lead into gold. And it's no surprise that my child is outside. I can hear him as we're on the podcast right now. My process from lead into gold that brings up a lot of emotion in me has been just my continuous learning curve with love. My continuous learning curve with understanding how to be love, how to embody love, how to let love work through me, how to let love be something that I give without expectation, how to let love be Josh. And the reason I'm emotional about it is because, currently we're working through a really hard time in our marriage. And my audience knows that my relationship has had its ups and downs, much like many relationships. And so I'm sharing this not to put a looking glass on me, but really a looking glass on all of us. How can we turn our own lead into gold? How can we become our own alchemist that's an embodiment of the Philosopher's Stone? Have you studied Jung at all? And how is Jung and his concept of the Philosopher's Stone and the alchemization process from lower self to higher self? Also having pure awareness and grace for our current self, not judging current self. How has Jung's work or certain philosophers like Jung impacted you and in your understanding of your own life?
Yeah. I started off reading his work and other authors that talk about the subconscious mind. That was when I started when I was 16. But what I found is that those hermetic principles can trump a lot of those teachings.
Interesting.
Yeah. One way to describe it is those teachings, I'm a huge fan of like identifying the first domino. If you knock the first domino down, the 100 dominoes downstream goes.
Yes.
The way I would describe it is hermetics allows you to push the first domino. Jung and so many other authors and subconscious programmers and NLP and all this stuff,
Yes.
it's like pushing a domino at a time downstream. It works. It just takes a little bit more effort. But if you go all the way upstream and you push that first one, I found that everything downstream goes. So I do want to offer that. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm a huge fan of just in general what he says, which is, if you're not in full communion with your subconscious, you will always be a slave to it. Right. And so one of our work is to recognize our subconscious self. And if we apply that to relationships, I know for me, consistently, my lesson personal is whenever I get upset with a partner or with anyone, I actually track how long does it take me to get from upset back to love. And I consistently work on shortening that duration and keep it simple. Because if you can shorten that duration to a second, life is pretty amazing. I'm definitely not at a second. I think just in the last 2 years, I would say I've transitioned from 3 to 4 days to recently 3 to 4 hours. And so, yeah. And so my goal really is 3 to 4 seconds, but we'll work on that.
How have you shortened this curve? What does the work look like and feel like for that?
Yeah. I will attribute most of that to Sarah, right? Current partner. She's the only partner I've ever had where I could be like, get the F out, like screaming at the top of my lungs. I'm so irritated. And she would just stare at me and say, I love you. And so when I met with that,
wow,
it's a lot easier to be like, got it.
Yeah.
I'm in this container of love. And even I intellectually know this, but the emotions, the somatic, right, needs time to like move the energy. Yeah. So it's a few hours. And then, earlier we did have a little, before I came here, like this morning, we had a little bit of a friction. And an hour later, I was like, sorry, I was being a dick.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
wow. It's like the extreme hot and extreme cold you were speaking about earlier.
Yeah.
And look, I don't care if it's for relationships, for manifestation, for embodying love, for just being a good human. Like these hermetic law, I've been podcasting for 10 years, almost 900 episodes.
Yeah. Wow.
And when I've come across your work, this is not to inflate your ego. This has made, along with about 4 or 5 other things, the most significant impact in my understanding of Josh and of love and of God, hands down, compared to anything. And so I'm grateful for you that you're teaching this. And I wonder, from a place of curiosity, what do people tend to either gloss over about the Hermetics, or when they're presented with the wisdom of the Hermetic system, what could they potentially not be ready to hear?
That's a great question. You're so good with the questions. Well, over the last 2 years, I've received hundreds of emails, unsolicited emails from people who have gone through the course, and some of them have gone through multiple times. And one thing I will say, consistently I get, the first time was wow, the second time was like 5 times more wow, the third time was like 20 times more wow.
Because they're starting to embody it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's the teachings, the way I speak them and channel, there's like many layers, and it'll just meet you at your current layer of understanding. And once you sort of progress through that, you'll have another deeper layer of understanding. Another unintended effect, before I get to answer, is I've had a few people where they went through with their partners, and not just romantic partners, sometimes with their business partners, they're like, it completely changed their relationship together, right? So there's that. And then as far as what would people potentially gloss over, I would say some of the more advanced practices, especially the one where you write down an identity or story and you write the opposite, that one tends to be glossed over. The reason is it is the most revealing of your shadow and ego and hidden side of you. And so for some people, there might be a subconscious program that says, I'm not quite ready for that right now. And that's okay. Right. And so you just give it time. And so that I would say, really give that section, the writing the opposite story and writing the benefits of that, like giving that practice a deep, devotion. Yeah.
I wonder if, I'm blanking on her name right now, but she has the 4 questions. Maybe you're aware of what I'm saying. Is it true? How do you know it's true? And then what's the turnaround? Byron Katie's work. I wonder if she, in many ways, I wonder if literally all spiritual teachers in some way are pulling wisdom either consciously or unconsciously from the hermetic system.
Same source. It's the source code. Yeah.
It is the source code. So literally, if there was a code around us, like a matrix code, it would be written in these symbols and languages.
Kabbalah, Christianity, so many spiritual practices and all the things. At this point, I'm like, oh yeah, that's just law 1, 3, and 7 combined, just permutations of laws. Everything is just a permutation of these 7.
And so at the core of them, the hermetics, the actual civilization or people, human beings that were getting these source codes from the creator self, do you feel like they did an incredible job of that? And what did they learn, the actual hermetics, by embodying the system and teaching it?
Yeah, if we are open beyond the modern narrative and we believe in Atlantis, right? And I preface it with, I've talked about Dahmer many times in Italy, and I might have mentioned that I actually have a video. I'm not allowed to send anyone a link, but I can share it on my screen. It's one of their time travelers that was physically going back to Atlantis, speaking about what he experienced.
See, this just sounds so wild for my modern understanding.
So wild, right. Well, I literally am watching this. I've been in a time machine. We did not use it to time travel. We used it to dematerialize and rematerialize. And that's exactly what happened, right? And so I've been studying it for years to know that they're not faking it. I mean, I'll give another example. I brought a friend over that brought an object, shows it to one of the Dahmer. He goes, oh yeah, that's a key to a Stargate, which is a portal to other dimensions, and trains her on how to use it. I mean, this is how advanced their understanding is. And so all that is to say, I'm really trying to sell that Atlantis actually was real. And Atlantis might have spoken about this in the first episode, wasn't an island that sank. It was basically Earth. It was Earth for about 36,000 years. And Thoth, which interestingly, if you go into Christianity, Enoch was a human. He's the only human that ever ascended to become an archangel Metatron. Enoch, Metatron, Thoth, Hermes, all one energy. Same source, right? If we look into what does Metatron represent, what does Enoch represent? Enoch was the human that ascended, became an archangel, and was the only archangel that God gave the entire library of knowledge to, which is Thoth. Thoth is like the credited as being the inventor of science and knowledge and wisdom. It's saying the same thing. And so during Atlantis, when this information was, and I'm sure it probably happened even before Atlantis, right? But during Atlantis, for 36,000 years, humanity lived in complete harmony with dimensional beings, extraterrestrials, all life forms on the planet, and they communicated telepathically, right? Because they knew that words were very limiting. Words are a very primitive way, and they use symbols, telepathy and symbols. I always laugh, like when we look at hieroglyphics, which are symbols, and we've decoded it to mean letters. In other words, we've dumbed down symbolic, esoteric understanding back into sentences and words and try to interpret the hieroglyphics as like sentences and words. We're completely not getting what they were there for, right? And so during that time, we lived in complete harmony because we understood and lived as these laws. And after the reset, right, which Atlantis blew up, and that's a whole nother topic, we lost that knowledge in a way, but it was coded and hidden. And now we're seeing and experiencing a resurgence of that wisdom, which is why I believe that our first episode was pretty popular online, is because my felt sense was like the world is ready for it now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why now?
My very Stephen egoic mind is because I'm like, that's what I'm into. And I'm creating this version of reality. Sure. And that's like the God self version.
I get that.
In a broader context, Kurzweil talks about how by 2032, everything changes. Like it's a very pivotal year for humanity. It's transhumanism. It's a very pivotal moment of we either head towards complete merging with tech to become this new life form, or there will be people that choose not that can create a whole new world. And I believe that we are just in that transition period to build us up. 2032 is right around the corner.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, we spoke about this with Tom Bilyeu, and he said that there will essentially be like Luddites that disconnect from all technology. I feel like there's a third. So I know you've brought forth two possibilities.
Yeah.
And maybe there's unlimited possibilities, really, depending on whatever intention we have. The third reality that I would love to be a part of, that my mind and my heart is I don't want to say attached, but it's definitely in alignment with it, is the blending of all and being able to be an arbiter with a heart and a consciousness for the greater good. Like you had said, spiritualpreneur. What was your word?
Spiritpreneuring.
Spiritpreneuring. So I can choose to be a spiritpreneur in 2032 and beyond that actually uses my message, my mission, my money, my family, my intention, everything about me to really be a shepherd of the love that we're speaking about. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do that. But that to me is exciting because I don't fall into the doom and gloom of Terminator and machines and all that. It's just not a reality.
Yeah.
If I spend too long on Instagram, it could be. So we have to be very cautious of that. Do you believe in that third reality? And if so, what do you see as far as a reality for 2032 and beyond?
Yeah. I think every viewer, listener can agree that in the last 5, 6, 7 years, things are happening faster and more instantaneous.
Yeah.
And we can attribute that to technological advancement. But there's a bigger context that's happening, which is, we can say astrologically, we're heading into a time where our, I'll use spiritual, whereas our DNA is being activated to be more powerful, right? I can also say that we are remembering our divinity. And so therefore our framework of reality and what the future will be is that much more powerfully manifested now than 20 years ago. And based on that, I believe my current theory is every human will live their own version of the future. Because God would want this. God wouldn't want only 2 versions, right? Or 3 versions. They would want infinite versions. And so this is where it's really important what you're allowing into your consciousness. Because if you're constantly allowing doom and gloom stuff, even though you don't want doom and gloom, right? It's like the study that says, make sure every day you say, I don't want to climb a ladder, but you imagine climbing a ladder. You're consuming it. Guess what happens? You're going to climb a ladder. And the people that are programming us know this, right? Which is why you want to be really choosy as to what movies you're watching, shows you're watching, what are you reading? Because they're not just entertainment and knowledge. The people who really know that when that program goes into you, they're using your consciousness to manifest a certain reality. And so I believe that we all have the infinite capabilities to choose whatever reality we want to live in. When I heard from the Kogi, I might have mentioned this, hey, human extinction in 15 years, I have an inner knowing that we'll make it. And everyone's like, how do you know all 8 billion people are going to turn around? I was like, no, I don't. I just know that I can blurp into the version where all 8 billion people turn around and we can make it. I'm not trying to change 8 million people. I just vibrate into that version of reality.
When you say blurp, you mean literally just on a frequency level, just transit to that reality. So this is fascinating. So then if we align ourselves with the greater good and some of the concepts you've brought forth, just from awareness and not even saying hardcore judgment, just from awareness and empowerment, you had said the people that know they can control by imprinting and by transmitting and using our consciousness to serve their good. Who might be these people and what might be these energies?
Yeah. So, if I were to use dominant Herdian context, if we are life in existence creates chaos, disorder, and disharmony in a way, right? It's just more variations, really is the word. There has to be an opposite force, which they would call non-life or non-existence, which creates order and simplicity and tries to make things smaller instead of bigger, basically. And so I would just categorize whoever is doing this as they are a part of that energy. And some people get a little bit more specific, like the draconians and the certain aliens and reptiles and all that stuff. We can create infinite stories, and they're all very entertaining. But in general, I like to keep things simple. It's just the other side that wants non-existence, and we are the side of existence, and we're just dancing. So
it's just the non-existent side.
Yep.
And there's many stories and rabbit holes that try to paint a picture of that.
You can make a lot of stories about what is non-existence.
One thing I appreciate about you is taking grand concepts and making them easy to digest. I think especially because of the load on people's attention span, it's super important. So I cannot wholeheartedly recommend this course enough. It's on the screen again, joshtrent.com/hermetics. we cover a lot of ground, which we always do.
Yeah.
What ground do you feel is most efficacious for love that maybe we haven't touched on?
Well, just reminds me of a story. I was talking to a friend of mine years ago who spent 9 months in complete silent meditation in Japan in a monastery. And when he was being interviewed to be able to do this in his monastery, he went into the monastery and the head sort of monk asked him, what do you think is the most valuable thing in this room? And he goes, oh, it's got to be the scrolls with all the ancient wisdom. And the monk's like, nope. He's like, oh, the art. Nope. The old furniture. Nope. He basically, after exhausting all the no's, he's like, what's the most valuable? And the monk said, it's the space. Without space, none of this can exist. And so if I had to pick one thing that allows love to do what it wants to do and be what it wants to be, is space. Without space, you cannot experience it or have it grow. And so what is space? Space, the thing that tends to limit space is boxes and nouns and judgment. And so you want to be really choosy as to, are you using nouns and which nouns? If not, get rid of nouns. If you notice, when I said the evolution from capitalism to conscious capitalism wasn't to spiritpreneur, it was spiritpreneuring, right? Because spiritpreneur is a box, it's a noun, right? Because technically you are a divine being currently named Josh, you can be spiritpreneuring. But once you say, I am a spiritpreneur, you're now in that context, right? You're not this divine being anymore. And so really just recognizing our languaging, our use of nouns, that's a box. Judgment is a box, right? If you feel anger or you feel anything other than love and you judge it, you're literally creating less space for love to come in and love that, right? So you want to let go of judgment. Allow yourself to feel the grief, the anger, the shame, all of it. Love it all, right? Give yourself full permission to fully feel it. It's very David Hawkins, right? Letting go. Like you fully magnify that feeling. Whereas we've been taught to, what can we do to fix it and get rid of it? He's like, no, you lean into it, right? And so leaning into it and loving yourself for even feeling that gives yourself space for the love to come in.
That's so good. On the screen right now, y'all, is this chart that I'm showing to Dr. Stephen. And I knew we were going to talk about this, so that's why I had it up. You'll notice at the very top, the frequency rate to be absolute self, which I believe is, I came across some new research and content on the power of authentic self, which is essentially what maybe the non-existent forces or the dead forces want to steal from us. I heard Greg Braden on Joe Rogan say recently that his definition of evil is that which wants to take away our humanness, that which wants to take away our creativity, our compassion, our connection, our heart, our love. And so if we're operating from these lower paradigms, we're essentially in purgatory. We are stuck in blame and shame and grief and apathy. Yet the paradox is that if we don't feel those emotions, we cannot ascend. It's such an interesting game. Can you give us any wisdom on the Hawkins scale and the essential purgatory versus the ascension process before we say goodbye?
To me, one of the most important ahas of Hawkins's scale has to do with the 200 being the cutoff point, right? 200 and from 200 to 1,000, you exist in truth. 199 and below, you exist in the absence of truth.
And 200 is courage.
Courage. And the big aha is desires 125 on that scale. Right. And so I think, to me, I've spoken so many times about this in various ways, which is why we meet so many people that have desires, get the desires, and they don't feel any additional fulfillment or happiness because it's existing in 125. And so really the most applicable everyday use of the Hawkins scale for everyone that I recommend is come from a place of knowing, which is 400. There's a difference between I want coffee versus I know I'm going to have a coffee. I want a Porsche versus no, I'm meant to have a Porsche. So on and so forth. And so just literally that slight change immediately changes everything from 125, which is absence of truth, to 400.
Oh, this is so good. Okay, we can't end yet. I'm having way too much fun. So in my understanding, on the screen right now, which we've showed many times, is the wellness pentagon. And so at the bottom is physical, the walls are mental, emotional, and the top is financial and spiritual, which probably actually interrelate to the words in the hermetics that you mentioned, the 5 domains of the hermetics. I think they're actually interoperable perfectly. I have found, and I wonder, as now we can give true parting guidance, because we got to wrap this up at some point, and we'll have you back for round 3, I'm sure. when I go to nourish one of the 5 sides of self, or in the hermetic system, when I go to be aware or increase my consciousness on one of the 5 domains, what I have found comes up for me is my stories that I've created as to why I can't nourish them. And what's been really revealing is they're my stories. They're not actually real. They're just passed down to me intergenerationally, epigenetically, that turns off and on my DNA of understanding as to how I can embody love or not.
Yeah.
Do you believe what I'm sharing with you is your own reality, or do you have a different way to describe it?
No, I'm a huge fan of realizing that everything that we've ever made sense of is just a story. And that story, interestingly, the opposite of that story must be true, but our cognitive biases prevents us from seeing the opposite story. And so this is why I alluded to when you said, what's the aspect of the course that people may tend to gloss over? It's writing the opposite story, because we're so attached to that person's an a-hole or that story, because it fulfills an identity and all the feelings that it justifies our reactions. It's tough. It's tough for your ego to be like, oh wait, that's not true. The other is true. But when you start to write the opposite story and you force your consciousness to write 10 things that prove that, just, a lot of Byron Katie's work, it's powerful. It's why it's so powerful. She's just leveraging that law of polarity and mentalism.
So it seems like the way for identity transformation is actually to look at the other story and to embody the other story.
Yeah. It's one of the most powerful practices.
Well, thank you so much for being my guest again. This is so rich.
Yeah.
And I could talk to you for a long time, because all of this stuff is my own journey. It's all of our journey too.
Yeah.
I mean, otherwise y'all wouldn't be with us. We're all kind of learning, fumbling forward together.
I say we're all humaning.
We're humaning.
And no one's ahead or behind. We're just having our unique humaning experience that we get to share.
My goal is that this podcast gets shared as much as it's supposed to be shared. So share this podcast if you feel like it's worthy. I know in my heart and soul that it is. It's on the screen right now again, joshtrent.com/hermetics. It's changed my life. It's changed hundreds, thousands of people's lives in our ecosphere. And thank you so much for the discount. Creating this and being like you said, spiritpreneuring is so special. So the code is Josh33. You can get a generous discount on the program. And please share with us, liberatedlife.com, as to how is this playing out for you? Can we support each other as we go through this identity transformation? That's really, without community, without support from others, without this conversation and it being shared, no change happens, because nothing changes.
Yeah, I would so appreciate people sharing. I was just with a group of people that came to this live experience, some of them from the episode and some of them from other videos. And a few of them said they were wondering when they messaged me on Instagram and I messaged back, they were like, is this really Steven or is it AI? I'm like, no, it's me. I don't use AI or any other machine.
Yeah.
I deeply cherish and value everyone's feedback about this, right? Because it's my passion.
Yeah.
And so I would love for everyone to kind of comment how this episode or the course has affected them. And I will be there trolling all of you and answering and sharing my thoughts.
Thanks for being my guest. Thanks for following your heart, doing something that you believe is truly meaningful, and also not taking it so seriously. Yeah. It's a beautiful non-attachment. Yeah. Y'all, this is so deep. There's so much here. There's a map. There's a compass. You can trust this. It's in my bones. I really love this work. And if you've been with us for a while, or if you're brand new, know that, from my heart, I'm wishing you love, wellness, but most importantly, over all things, I'm wishing you peace and power. You cannot have power unless it comes from peace. We'll talk with you next time.